Hello. Welcome back to the Saba show. We're back for the round 19 recap. Let's not waste any time. Let's hop right into the slate of games. So we will start on Friday night. And the Power, they got up against the Maggies. Look, for the Magpies, this was expected. They brought in two debutants. And they had a couple injuries to some of their big players. And look, they did considerably well without him. Pendlebury, went down. He's out for the season with a broken leg. And it looked pretty, it wasn't innocuous, but, it didn't look that severe at first glance. And then Adams went down the race in the last quarter. But luckily, I think he's okay. So they don't want to be losing any more experience, the Pies. The dynamic when Pendlebury went out and Cox came in, he wasn't offering much in the air. And then when the ball hits the ground, what you're going to get from him is like 210 centimeters tall. So he doesn't really get across the ground all that well. And you put a Tom Jonas on him and he's much more mobile. So he wasn't having any influence there, Mason Cox. The youngsters, they did well for the most part. For Towell and Ginnivan, they had their moments, as you do in your first game. There were a couple shaky possessions. I think Towell was playing on Dixon at times, and, I'd be worried if I was on Charlie Dixon for my first game. So, you understand it. Finn McRae was very good. He got his hands around it a bit more. I think his first game, he had 14 touches in one quarter, which is probably, that's the prolific manner in which the McRaes seem to get their footy. McRae does it. Jack McRae does it, every week. He gets 30 plus. So I think his brother will follow suit. But, he's got to improve his foot skills. But look, he was getting around it and he was doing some okay things with the football. For the Power, very strong win. Good tribute for Travis Boak's 300th. The ins of Dersma, Rosie, and Butters were pretty huge. They weren't setting the house on fire with what they were doing, but they were, they added a new aspect, new element to how the Power play, and they make the forward line extremely dangerous, way more dangerous than it's been the last couple of weeks. And you've got Gray and Fantasia to come back into the mix. I'm not sure when that is. I don't know what the timeline is, but once those two come back, mate, they're spoilt for options. So it's good for the Power, but look, this win, we expected the Power to win this. I say it every week, but once they beat a proven side in the top four, then you can start to take them seriously. Because if you can't beat the top four sides in the regular season, odds are you're probably not going to be able to beat them in the postseason. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. But yeah, once again, another strong win for Port Adelaide against a side that they should have dealt with. Now for my weekly Carlton rant. This week, as a Carlton supporter, you felt ashamed. Very, very, very ashamed. And it was an absolutely deplorable performance by our club. It started pre-game when, Harry went out a day before. And we decided to bring in Owies and then named Murphy as the sub. Now, they said that Brodie Kemp, it wasn't vividly stated that Brodie Kemp was going to get a debut, but it looked like it when he was doing that, it's like a tradition within footy clubs. If you kick a goal, you're playing your first game. They did that. That footage leaked on social media, and I think a lot of Carlton supporters were hopeful that, they were going to pick him for his first game, and then we were thoroughly disappointed when Murphy was named as the medical sub. Fair play to him for, I think he'll hit the 300. Fingers crossed for him because he deserves it, but at the same time, selection integrity is a problem with our footy club. We're picking players that should not be in the team, and we saw that throughout the game. Nunes had his moments. Matty Cottrell, he should not be in the team. As passionate as he is about the club, he was a Carlton supporter growing up. He does not belong on an AFL list. He's not up to standard. Some very questionable things he did on the day. And, just we had no tall targets to kick to. So we were pretty much asking for a loss here because we were just kicking it on the head of Cripps and Kennedy. It wasn't working. And then when you move Wiedering up forward in the last quarter, even though he's not a designated forward anymore, we were able to create chances because a bit of attention was going towards him. In the first 3 quarters, they didn't have to worry about that, and it was much harder for the Smalls to have an impact. So we kicked 6 in the last quarter and kicked 5 in the first 3. There's your problem there. There is your problem there. But no discredit to North because they played a brilliant game. We said the past few weeks they have been growing. And look, at halftime they could have shriveled up and faltered under pressure, but they absolutely blew us out of the water. And fair play to them. Nick Lakey, 7 goals. Huntington and Anderson as Ians were huge. Yeah, and this was their first 100-goal performance of the year. I mean, I'm going to say that Carlton's defense was shit because it was awful. The effort was so low all game. They were just allowed to usher it forward, and we looked so vulnerable when the ball was going through the corridor. No working back. We were willing to run on offense, but once the ball went the other way, because we were getting shallow entries and we weren't kicking scores, it was just a quick counter the other way. And that's why we conceded so many goals on the break to North players running out the back, is because simply we weren't willing to run back. And we were gassing ourselves too, because, those bomb kicks inside 450 were not going to work, ever. So, yeah, but North, very good win by them. They do not look like clear-cut wooden spooners anymore. They are equal on points with Hawthorn. So that's really good signs for North. David Noble, he's taken over and he's done a very good job. So fair play to North. Carlton needed to win this. And, we've choked our chance at finals. We do not deserve to be there. We got embarrassed on the weekend. And, I don't want to be embarrassed in finals. So, you know what? Just get rid of those finals hopes. And we reset for next season. We've got a month ahead. St Kilda, Gold Coast, Port, GWS. We could win all 4, but if you're basing it off weekend form, we're not going to win one game. So we'll see how we go, and we'll see if David Teague keeps his job. Anyway, the next game I covered was probably the fixture of the week. Melbourne played the Bulldogs at the MCG, and look, both midfields were on show in this one. I mean, I'm just having a look at the stats here. Oliver, he ended on 38, but I think he had 25 in the first half. Petrarca, he had 2 goals and 31. Maxi Gawn, I think he had 55 hitouts or something. Yeah, 57 hitouts. And then on the other side, you got McRae getting 38. I think Caleb Daniel got a goal and 34. And the Bont, he had 2 goals and 31. You'd think he gets the 3 Brownlow votes in this one. But look, the Dogs tied this one up. In basketball terms, you'd call it the season series. They tied at 1-1. The D's, they've only won 1 in their last month. And their tall forward situation's up in the air. I mean, Ben Brown, he hasn't proven himself as being the solution to their second tall. You know what you're going to get with Tom McDonald, but you do not know what you're going to get with Ben Brown. And they've been doing that rotation with Wiedemann all year, and I think they're working that out. I feel like that's just a process they're going through all season, and that's probably going to be the one thing that holds them back in going for a flag. It's just a question mark for Simon Goodwin, where the goals are going to come from for the D's, because they kicked 65 points on the weekend. That's not a winnable score. That's not going to get the job done. So, it's going to be very interesting how they cope with that. It's a bit disappointing that, COVID's hit, because I think this game really warranted a crowd, and, there's been a lot of hype around these two teams this year. So it's a bit of a shame, there was a bit of rivalry, a bit of tension in the air, a few little scuffles throughout the night. So, yeah, but, I mean, this game was, it lived up to the hype. We thought the D's were going to come back and run over the top, as good football sides do. I think they got within 4 points after Ben Brown kicked one to make it 67-63. And then, Bontempelli switched on. They kicked the last 3 goals of the game, and Bontempelli was huge. And it was also the third game of Ugle-Hagan, who, had a couple of crucial leads. He finished 1 goal and he missed 1. But for a player who's played 3 games, to convert under pressure like that and, lead up with assertiveness and take a strong grab, very, very positive signs for the Bulldogs. And I think, that's one of the luxuries the Dogs have had this year. I think they've played the most players this season. And, there's a lot of good players sitting in the wings, but, your Riley Garcias and Cody Waitmans as well. They've been really good. I think Riley Garcia offers something that is very similar to Waitman. He's a little pocket rocket. He's a little bit of a pest at ground level. He doesn't give a shit. He will tackle. I think he's just got that little feistiness that Cody Waitman has. And Cody Waitman was up for what seemed like an eternity over Max Gawn. So, very strong grab up there, especially in the wet. It wasn't raining when he took the grab, but, credit to him for holding on, because that was a long way up. But, from those two, very good signs. I think one thing that I should also mention before we move on to the next game is that Josh Shackey in was huge. I didn't expect him to play in the back line because he's never been a renowned defender. But once Alex Keith and Ed Richards went out, that in went, that looked like a genius play, to be honest. Because if he wasn't in, I think they would be fairly screwed in terms of matchups. But, he did a very, very good job. Took a couple intercept marks. He didn't give too much away. So I think that's a move that, I was surprised with it, but it worked for them. So I think that's something they will stick with. And, it could be, a revitalized career because, Wiedering had a lot of criticism earlier in his career when he played up forward. And then he went back, and look at him now. So I think that move, who knows? Who knows what Shackey could become? But anyway, let's move on to the next game that I covered. And the next game we are covering is the Sydney Freo game. And Sydney, they ran away with this one. They smashed the Dockers in the third quarter. And, basically ran away with the 4 points as they needed to do. Fremantle, I don't know how many more games they're going to win this season. They've lost Nat Fyfe for the season. Walters is out with a hamstring. Darcy was out there pretty much on one leg. I'm surprised he got through the full 4 quarters. But the Swans, their pressure was unrelenting, At one point, it was 23 tackles to 1 inside the forward 50. There was another crazy stat, I think, in the first, there were 12 minutes left on the game clock on the broadcast in the third quarter, and Sydney were up on possessions 53-12. So that is an absolute abomination. Absolute destruction there. But look, the Swans, they're slipping under the radar a little, I think, in the AFL. They could go for a decent finals push, make the prelims. They could make the grand final. They could go on a crazy run because they're capable of it. They've beaten some good sides this year. I think the story of this match was Isaac Heaney kicked 5 goals, looked like an absolute wrecking ball when he got it. And, I think a really underrated aspect of his performance was the defensive efforts. Earlier in the game when the Swans, they looked under siege because they came out a bit lethargic. The Dockers, they weren't capitalizing on their chances. They weren't converting on opportunities. Heaney was, intercepting. I think Sean Darcy took about 20 seconds in the goal square to get that ball on his boot. And then Heaney smothered it. He probably ran about 20 meters in that little sequence. But, those little things is what's going to elevate Heaney's game to the next level. Those defensive efforts. He's already a beast on offense. He can play all over the ground. But, those defensive efforts is what John Longmire, that's what he's going to want to see. Acts like that are going to go right through the whole team. And they're going to be lifted by it. And they're also going to put their body on the line to do the same thing. So, very strong performance by Isaac Heaney. For the Dockers, they were just fumbly all day. Dropping marks, doing really irrational shit like losing the ball, just questionable kicking, questionable decision making, all that jazz. And that wasn't just from your inexperienced or fringe players. That was from your leaders like Nat Fyfe. I think he fumbled some handball in the center of the ground. It was a turnover, and the Swans, they punished on the break, as they do if you turn the ball over. That was the same with Mundy, I think, a couple times. And Brayshaw as well. Brayshaw had a few howlers where it was just dropping simple marks, and he wasn't under pressure either. So yeah, but I think one thing that Freo should look forward to, it looked like they were putting Liam Henry in the middle late in the game when Fyfe was out. So maybe that's something that they can look towards, because he seemed to, be doing a decent enough job when he was around the footy. So, that's something maybe they can invest some time in this last month of the season, experiment. They are in the finals hunt, but I don't think, at least with their big players out, they're going to, scrape a couple more wins. I'm not too sure, but, they could surprise me. Last game of the round I covered was Essendon GWS, and in this one, the Giants, they got over the top, and the Bombers, they had plenty of chances, but you're not going to win too many games if you kick one goal in a half of football, and that is what the Bombers did. They pretty much stopped. All the threat they had earlier in the game was gone. The ambition they went with, that was gone. Their midfielders, they went missing in the big moments. Stringer, Merritt, Parrish, they were all, their influence was negated. And that's something that I thought would be the complete opposite pre-game in my predictions. But, the Giants surprised me. Whitfield, Callie staying in, Ward staying in, these guys, Mumford's, proven, if you look at the stats, he's proven to improve the Giants midfield, and, it showed. They moved Taranto to high half forward, I believe, but those moves seem to work. The Bombers, last week, and I think in weeks gone by, when the Essendon midfield is switched on and they become nuclear, they just take the game by the scruff of the neck and they dominate. But this game was where, they were relying on them to come into the game, come alive, get the ball in their hands, but it just wasn't happening for them. And, that was a crucial factor in deciding the game. So this idea of the Essendon midfield going missing can be seen as recent as last week, where Essendon went missing early, their midfield specifically, came out lethargic, weren't willing to work, and, that coincided with them being down in the contest. So you can see that when the Essendon midfield is not performing, their whole team gets smashed. So, they probably want to, as their team grows in experience, they want to be able to balance it out, that reliance. Once Perkins and Cox and Harry Jones and Durham and all those guys get a lot of games into them, that's when you'll be starting to see a little bit of the stress on the Bombers midfielders. That'll start to relieve itself. Huge win though by GWS. That puts them back in the 8. So I think Leon Cameron will be very happy with this performance. Jesse Hogan looked pretty lively up forward. And yeah, I think this was just a strong, all-around, gritty team performance. Wasn't convincing by any means. They did a very good job to turn it around from the very slow start that they had. They looked very vulnerable on defense, but they fixed that all up. Credit to them. It was just one of those games. But yeah, you take it and you run. I think if we look at the other games of the round really quickly, Brisbane absolutely killed Gold Coast. That's something like a 70-point swing in a half of football. The Suns were up by about 5 goals. At one point, I think it was 62 33 at one point, and it ended, the Lions kicked like 90 of the last 100 points. So that's absolutely hectic. When they were switched on, they got the job done very convincingly. So that's a good sign, that comeback. But the first half, you don't want to be seeing that, because if you fall into those bad habits and you become complacent, stuff like that's going to happen. You're going to find yourself 5 goals down, and you do not want to do that against a good football side. Let's move on to the West Coast and Kilda game. West Coast just held on. Max King kicked a bag. That's something we haven't really heard this year, Max King kicking a bag, but, you know, fair play to him. The Eagles held on, and look, the Saints look, I mean, from what I can see, they looked pretty threatening later in the game, but they were never really in it, you know, until it was too late. Saturday night, Adelaide beat the Hawks. This one, you know, there wasn't too much on the line. Both sides are pretty much out of the finals hunt. The Hawks, yeah, once again, they showed signs, and they were in amongst it. They were, you know, down by a goal in the last quarter, and then, you know, the Crows, they just put the foot on the gas and just kicked a couple goals late just to make sure of it. Rory led 2 goals and 35 plus, I believe. He's putting together a very fine season. Ben Keys, you know what you're going to get from him as well. It was good to have, you know, Duday, because he was back in this week. I heard he had a very, very strong performance, was arguably one of their best, and crucial to the team win. So, you know, you'd expect the Crows to get the job done, but, you know, good signs from the Hawks as well, with all the inexperience they're fielding. And the last game of the round, Geelong Richmond, or the last game of the round that I didn't cover, the Cats, you know, they just dominated, really, right from the first bounce. Never trailed. The game was pretty much over at half time. The Tigers, their scoring prowess is gone. I don't know what their team looks like without Dusty. It's like, where's that spark going to come from? Only kicked 8 goals. It looked very, very dire for them. You know, at halftime, I think it was 51-10 at the half. So, yeah, look, they're probably wishing they could, you know, rewind a day and, you know, change their fate. But, you know, it's very hard to see Richmond making finals this year, especially with Dusty out. I don't know what their draw looks like. But, you know, performances like yesterday, you know, they weren't convincing you. They're going to make a huge charge towards, you know, another finals berth. But yeah, the Cats, you know, people hate their game style, but, you know, they kick 15-5. They don't generate a lot of opportunities, but, you know, the defensive efforts win games. And giving away 57 points to Richmond, you know, is another prime example of that. So another strong win by the Cats, and I believe they're in the top 2 now. But that is all. It's been a mammoth recap. But I hope you enjoyed this one. Like the video, you know, if you want to be here for previews and recaps and be reminded of all that, subscribe to the channel. That's about it. But anyway, have a great day, and I will see you for the next one. Peace out.